Greetings LE2 Imperial Space Marines, and welcome to this Codex compliant special episode thing, where we're going to be looking at a subject that doesn't really fit into the regular series, but sort of feels like it should.
Today we're going to be taking a look at the humble Space Marine model. Even the most casual of glances at Warhammer 40,000 will observe that Space Marines are everywhere. Like, everywhere. Despite their canonical rarity, they represent over a third of the playable forces in the game. It makes sense, as frustrating as that might be to some. They are the most instantly recognisable thing from 40k, and most of the important stories from the setting involve them. Unsurprisingly, their model range is massive and has been constantly updated and added to for over 30 years. There's versions that are good, bad, Black Ops, Viking, Vampire, Gross, Unforgivable, Old, and New, just to name a few of the current line.
So we thought it might be fun to take a bit of a trip through the early Space Marine model line to see how it matured into the range that we know now.
That, and help justify the fact that we bought a bunch of old models.
Just to be clear, this is not a complete list of absolutely everything, since that would take hours and the exact chronology of everything can be a little hard to pin down in those early days. What we're looking at is the changes the model range went through before becoming something recognisable as the modern Space Marine. And we're just looking at mainline Marines, so no Chaos Marines and no Terminators. Those are videos for another time, and also, have you ever tried to buy one of these? There are certain issues. I suppose if you have to start somewhere, then the beginning is as good a place as any, so, let's do that.
The very first Space Marine model was the LE2 Imperial Space Marine sculpted by Bob Naismith. LE in this case meaning limited edition, 2 meaning that it was number 2 of the limited edition line, and Imperial Space Marine meaning, well, I mean I would hope that you would be able to figure that out for yourself. Just saying. It came out in 1985-ish. I mean, I say ish because although it says 1985 on the 2016 Remakes box, some places claim 1986 and it says 1984 in the Space Marine Collector's Guide. So although we're pretty sure it's 1985, there's just enough sources claiming different to make us hesitant about being definite. Regardless, whichever year it did come out, it predated Warhammer 40,000 as a game, and as such was an interesting vision of the grim darkness to come.
Like most early Space Marines, it's clad in what would come to be known as Mark VI Corvus armour, making him what fans tend to affectionately refer to as a beaky, due to the conical helmet. The basics of early Space Marine design are all there, the beak, the shoulder studs, the power pack, but there's a few things that separate it from most later releases. For one, it's just a solid lump of metal, not even the backpack is a separate piece. It's also pretty small, pretty skinny, and the limb armour is quite different in design to most later versions. Not sure what this little M on the shoulder pad is about either. The weapon is also unique and doesn't really fit in with the normal Marine aesthetic, looking more like something HR Giga would come up with if he stayed up all night thinking too much about sea cucumbers.
8 more Marines were released later in mid-1986 that used the basic LE2 design, complete with unusual weapons and integrated backpacks, all designed by Naismith. But they weren't the first, so they remain far less memorable than the LE2. We also get the first unhelmeted Marine here, who is charming. Moving on to 1987, and Warhammer 40,000 First Edition was released. Too much rejoicing. It was also here where we got the classic RTB-01 plastic Space Marine box designed by Naismith, Ali Morrison, and Jez Goodwin. These were the first plastic Marines and were also the first 40k multi-part box, hence RTB-01. I'm gonna be honest, every single time I see that written down, I read it as Retweet Boy for some reason.
The base plastic for these came in a variety of colours depending on when you bought them. Honestly, if you told me a few years ago that varied colours of plastic was the thing from the late 80s GW was going to bring back, then I wouldn't have believed you, but here we are. Nothing is certain, life is chaos.
Compared to a modern model, these sculpts are very, very basic, lacking a lot of the little details you come to expect on a 40k miniature. The eyes, for instance, are nothing but indents in the plastic and the shoulder studs are barely defined at all. However, due to the arms having a sort of ball joint arrangement, there is a surprising amount of posability in this old kit. They're also, like most 40k miniatures of this era, a lot smaller than their modern equivalents, something made more extreme by the slightly odd squatting stance they have. We invite you to try and emulate this pose, it's really uncomfortable.
Despite the lower detail of the kit, it does start the very slow journey of refining the look of Marines. Already, the arms and legs have taken on a look that's far closer to the contemporary design than those pre-Rogue Trader models, but it does have some interesting quirks that are unique to this era, like the bolter design that had the magazine towards the front of the gun, making it remarkably hard to pose the hands comfortably.
Also, I would imagine having the magazine up front like this wouldn't be particularly conducive to it being an effective firearm, but I mean, when has that ever stopped science fiction before?
As well as the plastic beakies, there were a host of metal marines released between 1987 and 1989 that mostly followed the same general design as the plastic ones, but with higher detailed sculpts due to the medium. At the time, the tech wasn't really there for high detailed plastics. This marine with a multi-melter is one of the earlier ones and was also designed by Naismith, although in this era there were multiple designers working on the Space Marine range, like the previously mentioned Goodwin and Morrison, along with the likes of Michael and Alan Perry and Mark Copplestone. As you can see, they've started supplying the backpacks as a separate piece by this point, which is good from a painting perspective, but less good from a collecting them in the present day perspective. You see, when buying these models nowadays over the magic of the internet, it's fairly rare to actually get the backpacks with them unless you get something still in its blister. When you do get the backpack, they're usually plastic and similar in design to the ones that come with the RTB01 kit, but some from this era came with metal backpacks, which are even rarer to find these days.
Anyway, this era of Marines are notable for a couple of things. For one, many of them have names. The multi-melter guy's name is Brother Angst, for example. But he's fun at parties. And there's also a lot of, shall we say, oddness about them. I mean, no shade to the sculptors, they did a great job with the technology available to them, but there's plenty with weird faces, strange poses, or stuff that's just bizarre from a modern perspective. Like this one with a shuriken catapult, or tech marines with enormous blowtorches. I mean, I don't know the first thing about land speeders, but I'm sure that's all you need to fix the anti-grav drive on one. That or a comedically sized spanner.
These also come from the era when Games Workshop were using lead in their models, so... You hear that sound? That's me poisoning myself. If you have some of these, try not to eat them.
The general proportions and scale of these models can be all over the place too. Compare the 1987 Angst with this medic from 1988 and you can see the sort of variation we mean. You might also notice here that the shoulder studs were another thing that has a ton of variance on these early models too for some reason. Not all of them were beakies either. Here's a chaplain model from around that era with their trademark skull helmet, and towards the end there were even a couple of releases that were in Mark 7 armour. This is the type of marine that people think of when you say Rogue Trader Space Marine. Slightly wonky little dudes that are thoroughly charming, but still a little weird.
Then, around 1990, seriously, pinning down a precise release date for these things is incredibly difficult. Something happened. Space Marines started looking really good. This series of Marines were designed by Jess Goodwin, and in doing so he created a template from which all future Marines would borrow from. It cannot be overstated how much better this era of sculpts were than their predecessors. The quality increase and perhaps more importantly the consistency across the range is incredible. Hell, aside from being a little small and thin, they still look pretty good next to their contemporary counterparts, even if they lack the finer details. Mark 6 armour was ditched for the iconic Mark 7 Aquila pattern, so gone with the shoulder studs and gone with the pointy helmets, and the bolters started to look more like guns that could actually function. These models consisted of metal bodies with plastic arms and backpacks wherever possible. The plastic arms are actually one of the easiest tells of a model coming from this era. If you see a Mark 7 Marine holding a gun with their hands flat like this, then they're from this era. I mean, that is if all the other design elements don't give it away already. Some of the other tells are the lack of this ridge on the back of a helmet and the lack of panel lines on the limbs. This range stayed around for a long time too. The fact they feature so prominently throughout the 2nd edition codices always makes us think of them as being more of a 2nd edition thing, despite them coming out during 1st. Hell, these tactical marines are still very common in 3rd edition codexes too.
Although Mark 7 armour dominated, around the same time there were several marines put out of different armour marks, also designed by Goodwin. We're not sure exactly when these came out since we don't have any, and some of them were pretty short-lived, but looking at old catalogues they seem to be from just before the Mark 7 Goodwin line was rolled out. They filled in the rest of the previous armour versions from the lore, from Mark 1 all the way to Mark 8. We also got new beakies, which is nice. Taking a little detour outside of 40k proper for a second, there were yet more Marines produced in 1990 that are unique but aren't entirely a GW creation. Space Crusade was a game produced by Games Workshop and Milton Bradley Games based on the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It's also really great fun, and if you ever get a chance to play it, do. It had unique models for a host of different 40k units, but given the conceit of the video, the ones we're interested in here are the Space Marines. They're a little more basic and robust compared to the 40k ones, but they were made for a board game designed for children, so, I mean, I guess that makes sense. They came in 3 pieces with easily interchangeable weapons, as you could equip your squad numerous different ways. They also came in 3 fetching colours, with red plastic representing Blood Angels, yellow representing Imperial Fists, and blue representing the Ultramarines. Sorry, our painted example is none of those. Blame Wib.
Another interesting touch is that these Marines lack any skull motifs, and even the Aquillas on them look a little less... how can I put this? A little more birdy and a little less fashy than normal. This is all probably because the game was made for kids and the minis were only designed by GW, with MB actually producing them. The skull thing is lampshaded too, since rather than having a winged skull on their chest as many Marines do, they just have a blank circle on an Aquila, so the absence of something is palpable. Except, and here's the weird thing, winged anything on the chest pieces weren't even particularly common until the Jess Goodwin Mark 7 line was released, so maybe the blank spot is there for some other reason. Who knows.
There's also some slightly different versions of the sculpts on the side of the game's box that we can only presume are the prototypes. They're, interesting.
But we know what you're thinking. Even though these aren't a Games Workshop product, they are Space Marines from the Imperium of Man. So, are Space Crusade Space Marines legal to use in a Games Workshop store? Well, we asked at our local Games Workshop store, and they didn't know. So, we emailed Warhammer World, and they never responded. So, we emailed Games Workshop directly, and they said it would be down to the individual store manager.
But we were still curious as to whether they'd allow that kind of thing at Warhammer World, seeing as they tend to be a lot stricter on that kind of thing there. So, we got on a bus, went all the way to Lenton, to Warhammer World itself, and asked there. Where they said, and I quote, it's fine if you want to use them here, but probably wouldn't let you use them in tournament play.
I hope you appreciate our in-depth investigative journalism on this very important matter.
Anyway, while we're here, let's hear the kid from the Space Crusade advert say Dreadnought.
Dreadnought!
Nice.
With that, we leave first edition behind and enter second. As we said earlier, some of the Rogue Trader sculpts would stick around throughout second, but there was one basic Marine mini from the start of second that bears mention, as it stood the test of time, remaining iconic, remaining beautiful in its simplicity. We are, of course, talking about the classic 1993 Monopose Marine.
They're kind of bad, but there's still something incredibly nostalgic about these things, if you're the right sort of age. They would come in many kits over the years, but were probably most well known for coming in the second edition box set. The first proper big box set 40k had. You can even still see a couple of giant Marine statues at Warhammer World to this day who very much resemble this sculpt. They came in 3 pieces just like their Space Crusade predecessors, but were made to fit in more with the 1990 mainline GW sculpts, with some variants for special weapons and sergeants. They also had a very long life, living on way past 2nd edition in paint sets and the like. Meaning that if you had started playing 40k anytime around the 90s, chances are you'll still have a few of these knocking around.
And if you're lucky, they'll be in better condition than mine as well. After that, we reached something approximating modernity. In 1998, along with 3rd edition, we got an all-new plastic Space Marine Tactical Squad kit that cemented the contemporary look of Marines. And it was fantastic, as you can see by this lovely beaky version here. The kit had vastly more detail and posability than its previous iterations, and was way more varied than the previous sets. You could consider this the beginning of the golden age of Marines, since from then until now, the vast majority of Marine kits have been thoroughly interchangeable. There are exceptions, of course, but you can buy almost any non-Primaris Marine kit and its parts will work absolutely fine with kits released 20 years ago. For example, the ones you see here have parts from the Venerable Dreadnought kit, the Chaos Space Marine kit, and the old Forge World Mark IV kit. The only real tell that many Space Marine parts were made in 1998 over their contemporary equivalents is that they're just made of a softer, lighter grey plastic.
Strangely, in a 2016 article about Marine armour, GW stated that this kit came out in 1997, despite the sprues saying that they're from 1998. So the more research we do for this video, the less certain we are of anything, so it's probably best to just end it here. After the 1998 kit, the changes were all fairly minor. Quality improved, kits changed, heights occasionally crept up, but on the tabletop you'd be hard pressed to tell if a basic tactical marine was from a kit bought in 1998 or 2019, if it wasn't for the larger bases that we use now. And looking back through all the models we've shown, I think it's safe to say that the modern range is vastly superior to the old ones, in a technical sense. But there's a certain charm to these old miniatures, and seeing them being used today always elicits a smile. Although one thing that we really wish was still around from the old days is how they'd always tell you who designed the minis on the catalogue pages. It just feels more respectful of the artists who put all that time in to create these little models that we love.
Obviously there were countless specialist troops, characters, or chapter-specific variants released between 1985 and 1998 that we haven't mentioned here, but we thought this would be a good overview of the early years of the Space Marine model line and show how we got from the LE2 to where we are now. And just for a little bit of fun, let's see how much these old models are dwarfed by their modern Primaris counterparts.
So, we hoped you enjoyed this little deviation from the normal rulebook stuff, and if you did, let us know and we'll try and get more of these videos done in the future.
Okay, look, I'm just going to be straight with you. I just really want to buy a bunch more models I don't need, so come on, just help me out here.